Welcome. This is Acorn Ask Attorneys, and we have a friend of ours, Jackie Cannon, who is an attorney in Denton County. She has agreed to help to demystify the court process for us mental health practitioners. Our topic today is TRO and protective orders and how not to step in it. We're not giving legal advice here, just remember that, but more of kind of an overview and a step into what the legal world kind of looks like. If you have specific questions, feel free to call Jackie Cannon or ask your own attorney questions about specific cases or orders. Know that that is a really good idea to do if you don't know what the order says. Okay, Jackie, so tell me, what is a TRO?
So a TRO is a temporary restraining order. I think sometimes people get a little bit confused as far as who can get a TRO, what does it apply to. In this context, we're talking about TROs in family law cases. They can apply to the parties, they can apply to the children, certain events like, in particular, if a party has a substance abuse problem, or they get arrested for, a crime, you can get a temporary restraining order preventing them from having access to or contact with the children. It can prohibit certain behaviors that may not necessarily be covered by our Denton County standing orders. So it's a really good way to be able to get some immediate relief on some very important issues that may not necessarily be something that you could get relief through a protective order for.
Okay, so that's a great segue into my next question. What is a protective order?
So a protective order is an order. There's several different types. Generally, you're looking at, it starts off as like a magistrate's protective order or a temporary protective order. And then at some point throughout the judicial process, it can become a final protective order. But a protective order itself deals with domestic violence type issues, family violence, stalking, sexual assault violence. The remedies under a protective order, when it comes to enforceability, are a lot stronger than a temporary restraining order. A protective order, if somebody violates it, it allows the law enforcement to come in and do an immediate arrest, whereas the enforceability of a temporary restraining order does not allow for that. You have to do an enforcement process, filing an enforcement, having a hearing, and if the court finds they violated the restraining order, then they can be held in contempt and be ordered to jail. So one process, the protective order, has an immediate remedy. The temporary restraining order does not.
I don't mean that something bad happened, like they actually did something, because sometimes you can see these TROs in situations where nobody's decided what's happened yet.
So a temporary restraining order and a temporary protective order are both just temporary. Generally, the rule is the court has to have a hearing within 14 days to determine whether a final protective order is going to be issued or if the temporary restraining order will become temporary injunction. They're just meant as kind of like a placeholder. It does not always mean just because a temporary restraining order has been issued or a temporary protective order has been issued that somebody actually did something wrong. The general consensus is, especially for a temporary protective order, that there has been some level of domestic violence. But it is still up to the parties seeking the relief to prove their case in that domestic violence has occurred. Now, there has been a recent change in the law that makes protective orders easier to get on a final basis. It used to be you had to show that family violence has occurred and is likely to occur in the future. And a lot of people ended up getting denied final protective orders because it was difficult to meet that second prong of it's likely to occur in the future. That second prong has now been removed during this last legislative session. So now you just have to show the court that there's been a history or pattern of domestic violence, and the court can award you a protective order. Protective orders, generally the default is a 2-year length of time that they're in place. However, in certain circumstances and by court order, they can actually be extended to lifelong protective orders.
Wow.
temporary restraining orders, unless they become permanent injunctions at the end of a case, terminate as soon as that case is over.
So who's responsible for following the TRO and the protective order?
So the main onus is on the parties because they're the ones that are affected by it. Oftentimes, especially when you're dealing with cases of domestic violence, it is not unheard of for the victim to start having communications or to have involvement with the other party that would be violations for that other party within the context of the protective order. But generally, it is up to the parties to ensure that they are abiding by those, because it does come with major repercussions. I mean, jail time is a very serious consequence. In the context of mental health professionals and their practice, it is not your job to enforce the protective order. You're not the trier of fact. You're not the sentencing person. However, it does absolutely affect how you're able to perform your duties within whatever context you have been hired on the case or appointed on the case. So it is very important that you know exactly what that TRO says or what that protective order says, and then try to find ways to be able to do your duties within that context without violating it. The worst thing you want to do is have somebody who has a protective order that says you can't come within 500 yards of the other party, and then you're trying to schedule joint in-person sessions with them, because now you have a situation where that person, in order to comply with you, has to violate the protective order. So it's really, really important to, as part of your intake process especially, make sure that you're asking. A lot of people get very confused about things. In our world, we often have people who come in and say, well, I have a protective order. Except they didn't have a protective order, they had a restraining order. They're kind of conflating the two. So it's really important that as part of your questionnaires, if you don't already, have questions about, you know, are there prior orders in this case? Has there ever been a restraining order issued? Has there been a temporary protective order issued, or a magistrate's protective order, or a final protective order? That way, you know from the outset, okay, there might be something here, and then work to get copies of it. If there are attorneys on the case, the easiest thing to do, shoot an email to both attorneys and just ask them, are there any restraining orders or protective orders that I need to be aware of? And if so, please provide me copies of it. Restraining orders probably don't affect what you're doing as much as a protective order would, because a restraining order, depending on the context, most of the time, if there's domestic violence, you're going for a protective order more so than a restraining order. And restraining orders generally kind of tied towards the kids or preventing people from doing certain things with regard to property. Protective orders can be very comprehensive. They can also be very minimal. Some protective orders say you can't go within 500 yards of somebody. Some protective orders will limit the communication to, like, our family wizard or app close or through attorneys, which, if the communication is limited in those circumstances, that makes it extremely difficult for you to do your job if part of your job is to have joint meetings with these people.
Right.
So it may be a situation where, if that is the case, but the court has appointed you to do parent facilitation, you may need that court order to actually specify the exemptions to that protective order. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely difficult to do something like parenting facilitation when you can't talk to the parties together, even if it's by, like, Zoom. Generally, if there is a protective order, even in cases like mine, if there's mediation and the parties want to mediate, the still preference for me, at least, is they are not in the same building. It could be by Zoom. It could be one person's by Zoom and one person is in person with the mediator. But generally, if there is a protective order, just out of an abundance of caution, I try to never have them in the same place. But Zoom is a really great option, I think, in lieu of that.
It is. Well, Jackie, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Can you give the best way to contact you if somebody has a question about what the information you just provided?
Yes, best contact method, because it follows me everywhere, is email. My email address is Jackie, Jackie, at Coker Legal, CokerLegal, all one word, .com.
Yay! Thank you, Jackie. And I am so excited to have had you. You are our very first attorney to ask questions of, and you gave a very comprehensive answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.